The U.S. Bureau of Reclamation projects in 2 years' time, Lake Mead may be set to be at its shallowest levels in recorded history.
The Bureau released its 2- and 5-year projections earlier this year, showing levels hovering at about 1,000 feet.
Lake Mead just rose 1 foot, and if you only read the headlines, you would think the crisis is over. News anchors are smiling. Politicians are taking cautious victory laps. Social media is calling it a miracle rebound. After years of devastating drought, shrinking shorelines, and apocalyptic predictions, 1 foot of rising water feels like hope. But inside the federal agencies that monitor this reservoir 24 hours a day, the mood is very different. No champagne, no celebration, just scientists running updated models. And what those models are showing is not recovery. It's a warning. The illusion of a comeback. On the surface, a rising lake sounds like good news. After all, Lake Mead had been in free fall for years. By 2022, it had dropped to just over a quarter of its total capacity. The bathtub ring, a stark white mineral stain, climbed nearly 180 feet up canyon walls, marking how much water had vanished. Boat ramps were stranded in the desert. Sunken vessels resurfaced. Even human remains emerged from sediment that had been underwater for decades. So when the lake ticks upward by a foot, it feels like a reversal. But here's the scale problem. Lake Mead is still roughly 160 feet below full capacity. 1 foot in a system that large is barely measurable in terms of long-term stability. It's not a comeback. It's a pause. And the system it's sitting in remains deeply unstable. The snowpack miracle of 2023. To understand the current moment, we have to go back to 2023. That winter delivered a record-shattering snowpack across the Rocky Mountains. The frozen reserve that feeds the Colorado River swelled beyond forecasts. When spring arrived, meltwater surged downstream. Lake Mead rose by more than 20 feet that year. Its upstream partner, Lake Powell, climbed more than 50 feet. It was extraordinary. Forecast models had predicted decline. Instead, water levels surged upward in a dramatic reversal. But here's what matters. Even after that historic rise, Lake Mead was still critically low. One exceptional snow year cannot erase a 20-year structural water deficit. The Southwest consumed that snowpack windfall in roughly 12 months. Cities kept growing. Farms kept irrigating. Evaporation, intensified by rising temperatures, kept pulling water off the lake's surface every single day. Nature delivered a gift. The basin used it almost immediately. And now we're celebrating 1 foot. The 20-year deficit nobody can ignore. The real crisis is not one dry year. It's 2 decades of imbalance. For more than 20 years, the Colorado River basin has been withdrawing more water than the river naturally replaces in an average year. That gap, that structural deficit, has been masked at times by wet seasons or conservation measures, but it has never been closed. Lake Mead is where that imbalance shows up. The legal backbone of this entire system, the Colorado River Compact, was signed in 1922 during one of the wettest periods in the last 1,000 years. The flow estimates used to divide the river among 7 states were overly optimistic. Modern climate science has confirmed it. The numbers were wrong from the beginning, and now a hotter, drier 21st century is trying to operate under a 20th century agreement built on inflated water expectations. That's the core vulnerability. Why 2027 is the year. Scientists whisper about inside water management circles. There's a date that keeps surfacing in modeling discussions. 2027. Based on current climate projections, evaporation rates, usage patterns, and conservative snowpack assumptions, some models suggest Lake Mead could reach the lowest water level ever recorded since it was created by the Hoover Dam in 1936. Not the lowest in a decade. Not the lowest since 2000. The lowest in its entire recorded history. Scientific debate exists about the exact timing. Some researchers argue the models represent worst-case scenarios. Others believe they may actually be too conservative, given how quickly temperatures are rising across the Southwest. But here's what's undeniable. The trend line is not pointing toward long-term recovery. It's pointing toward tightening constraints, the toxic underside of rising water. There's another story unfolding that rarely makes headlines. When Lake Mead hit historic lows, it exposed decades of lake bed that had not seen daylight since the reservoir first filled in the 1930s. That lake bed wasn't just sand and rock. It contained remnants of old mining operations, industrial industrial runoff, heavy metals, and chemical residues accumulated over nearly a century of activity along the river corridor. As the water rises again, those areas are not being cleaned. They're being submerged. Environmental scientists are now studying whether newly flooded sediments are releasing contaminants back into the water column, water that supplies drinking systems for roughly 40 million people across 7 states. The answers are still emerging, but rising water does not automatically mean cleaner water. Sometimes it means disturbed sediment. 40 million people on one reservoir. The number 40 million is not abstract. It represents real cities, real homes, real agriculture. Las Vegas draws about 90% of its water directly from Lake Mead. Every fountain on the Strip, every residential tap, every hospital cooling system. Arizona depends heavily on Colorado River allocations for both cities and agriculture. Rapid growth in Phoenix and Tucson increases demand even as supplies tighten. California's agricultural sector holds some of the basin's oldest and most senior water rights, creating political friction with neighboring states that absorb larger cuts during shortages. Tribal nations hold federally recognized water rights that are increasingly central to negotiations as the compact approaches renegotiation deadlines. Every stakeholder has a claim, and there is less water to divide. Evaporation, the invisible drain. There's a factor many people underestimate: evaporation. As temperatures rise across the Southwest, more water is lost directly from Lake Mead's surface. A hotter atmosphere pulls moisture faster. What used to evaporate over days now evaporates more quickly. This is physics, not politics. Even if inflow remains steady, higher evaporation alone can drag the reservoir downward, and climate projections consistently show increasing heat across the region through the late 2000s. That means the system has to conserve not just to maintain stability, but to counteract growing atmospheric demand. The political clock is ticking. The Colorado River Compact is approaching a renegotiation phase that many experts consider the most consequential water negotiation in modern American history. 7 states, federal agencies, tribal nations, agricultural coalitions, environmental groups, all must agree on how to divide less water than originally promised. Voluntary conservation has made progress, but models suggest deeper structural cuts may be required. Agriculture accounts for the majority of Colorado River withdrawals, often more than 70% basin-wide. That means meaningful change cannot come from urban conservation alone. Urban residents installing low-flow showerheads helps, but it's not enough by itself. The tools exist, but is there time? There are solutions on the table: advanced irrigation efficiency, crop switching, paid fallowing programs, expanded water recycling, renewable energy expansion to reduce reliance on hydroelectric generation from Hoover Dam, real-time satellite monitoring of basin conditions. The technology is better than ever. The data is clearer than ever. What's uncertain is whether political will and coordinated action can scale fast enough before 2027 becomes more than a projection. Because lakes do not respond to press conferences, they respond to inflow, outflow, temperature, and gravity. So what does 1 foot really mean? 1 foot of rising water feels hopeful, and hope matters. But context matters more. 1 foot does not erase a 160-foot deficit. 1 snow season does not cancel 20 years of overdraft. 1 headline does not change the math. Lake Mead is not collapsing tomorrow, but it is operating in a system that remains structurally overextended. The scientists aren't panicking, they're modeling, and the models are pointing toward a narrowing window. The real question. The question is not whether Lake Mead is in crisis. It is. The question is whether enough people are paying attention before the system forces attention upon them. Because if the 2027 projections prove accurate, or even partially accurate, the adjustments required will not be gradual or comfortable. They will be immediate, and they will affect tens of millions of lives. The water rose 1 foot. The headlines celebrated. The scientists kept running their models. And somewhere beneath the surface, the long-term physics of the American Southwest continue to unfold, indifferent to optimism, immune to politics, and bound only by the laws of nature. If you want deeper, fact-driven breakdowns of the stories shaping our world, the ones beneath the headlines, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel, because sometimes the most important story isn't the one everyone everyone is celebrating. It's the one still developing beneath the surface.